All right, it is 1 o'clock now, so we will go ahead and get started as people start or continuing to join here. Welcome to an ACT-informed approach to crisis prevention services. Scott will be presenting today. We're super excited to have him. First, I'm going to go through some housekeeping things. My name is Danielle Daly. I'm the Professional Development Coordinator here with the Illinois Crisis Prevention Network. You are muted, your cameras are disabled. As always, please use that chat box throughout the presentation. I know that Scott will be asking you to interact if you have any questions. Make sure your settings are set to everyone so that everyone can see your interaction. I think it automatically defaults to hosts and panelists, so make sure that's set to everyone. You can also use that Q&A for questions also. We will run from 1 o'clock to 2:45 today. 2:45 will end. If you have any additional questions after that, we can address that. Please visit our website, icpn.org. We do have another upcoming webinar that is on there for next Wednesday, April 24th. We'll be talking about authentic leadership and a mindset for success. We will have additional webinars that will be added here shortly. In which case, please join our mailing list so you can be the first to know about those. You can get to that link via our website. It is on the top right-hand corner of our website, icpn.org. If you are a BCBA or a BCABA today, because you're receiving credits, I will need you guys to send me an email with your certification number, and then I will send you a separate evaluation that has to be completed in order for you to receive your certificate. Everyone else, because you have clicked on the link and you have joined, you are accounted for, and you will get a continuing education certificate within 14 days. But please do give me that 14 days to get them out to everyone. We do have a lot of people that are registered and are supposed to be on today. But like I said, everyone will get them within 14 days. If you are a BCBA or a BCABA, please send me an email. My email is right under my name or right under my picture here to make it easier for you. But I will also put that information into the chat box so that you have it. If there's any other questions or concerns regarding these webinars, you can also email me at that same email address. I think that is all I have, Scott, if you want to go ahead and get started.
All right. Well, thank you, Danielle. I appreciate the introduction and welcome everybody to an ACT-informed approach to crisis prevention services. As Danielle said, my name is Scott Sanders and I'm a behavior analyst with the Illinois Crisis Prevention Network. Just to give you some context in terms of some goals for this presentation, in terms of context, earlier this year, our director, Kim, asked if anybody on our team had any interest in developing a training or a presentation about something that they were passionate about. And of course, I came up with this idea of let's utilize something with ACT. And in the course of researching things, ultimately, this presentation grew much bigger and took a much more, what I feel is a much more holistic approach to trying to put the pieces of ACT together in our day-to-day activities as crisis prevention staff. Secondary to that, because behavior analysts, for many years, as I've talked to people within the field, sometimes struggle with some of the terminology associated with ACT and feel that some of it is somewhat mentalistic. Hopefully for you behavior analysts out there, some of the information that is provided today in behavioral terms will be helpful in understanding some of the utility and the behavioral change mechanism behind the ACT strategies. So without any further ado, acceptance and commitment therapy has developed as behavioral intervention to help people learn strategies to live life more in the present, more focused on important values and goals, and less focused on painful thoughts, feelings, and experiences. As I was first researching for this presentation, I found this definition and I found it fascinating in that I thought I had read the sentence wrong when I read, has developed as a behavioral intervention. But the more I thought about it, ACT really has developed as a behavioral intervention. While traditionally we may think of it as a form of talk therapy, it has developed as a behavioral intervention because of the behavior change strategies that have been embedded within the therapy itself. ACT teaches people how to engage with and overcome painful thoughts and feelings through acceptance and mindfulness techniques to develop self-compassion and flexibility and to build life-enhancing patterns of behavior. And so instead of just recognizing thoughts and emotions for what they are and maybe distancing yourself, individuals in ACT engage with those painful thoughts and feelings and then learn how to work through them through acceptance and mindfulness techniques. ACT is not about overcoming pain or fighting emotions. It's about embracing life and feeling everything it has to offer. And for me, that was the most important piece of ACT. That was the thing that made it unique and different from every other form of therapy that I'd ever seen. Instead of focusing on, okay, so the person has depression, how do we get rid of depression? Person has anxiety, how do we get rid of anxiety? Instead of taking that model, ACT takes the approach of, you're never going to get rid of the depression. You're never going to get rid of the anxiety. Thoughts and emotions. We have to embrace these things and feel them fully. At its basis and at its core, ACT beings struggle with is control and avoidance. Many of us avoid the things that are unpleasant and uncomfortable in our lives, and as a result, spend a great deal of time engaging in avoidance strategies so as not to come in contact with these unpleasant thoughts and emotions. And so ACT, instead of just allowing that avoidance focus of the therapy, and utilizes that as breaking down those avoidance strategies and helping that person overcome by breaking down the avoidance strategies that obviously have not been working. ACT is developed within a scientific tradition, and there continues to be a thriving research community that examines basic science underlying ACT and the effectiveness of applying ACT across numerous life problems: anxiety, depression, PTSD, substance abuse, chronic pain. It is being used virtually across the country with every population. Developed within a coherent theoretical and philosophical framework, acceptance and commitment therapy is a unique, empirically based psychological intervention that uses acceptance and mindfulness strategies together with commitment and behavior change to increase psychological flexibility. I underline the theoretical and philosophical for all of us behavior analysts out there who know that in behavior analysis, we are such an empirically based field that there are no theories in the field of applied behavior analysis, with the exception of relational frame theory. And because it is still considered theoretical and a philosophical framework, it is in terms of an applied behavior analytic standpoint. But RFT, as well as functional contextualism, as well as applied behavior analysis, are the three things that are the foundation of ACT. And so the goal of ACT is ultimately to increase psychological flexibility. And psychological flexibility means contacting the present moment fully as a conscious human being, and based on what the situation affords, changing or persisting in behavior in the service of chosen values. One of my favorite professors in graduate school was Dr. Anthony Cuvo, who was very famous in saying, words mean something. And throughout this discussion, as well as throughout ACT, I've always been reminded of that. Words mean something. So even in this definition, psychological flexibility means contacting the present moment. So being here now, but contacting that present moment fully as a conscious human being. So being able to open up and allow those uncomfortable, unpleasant feelings, as well as all of the good things that happen in life. And based on what the situation affords, what the here and now is affording you in this environment, you can either change or persist in behavior because you have the ability to engage in a behavior despite all of the history of reinforcement that you have engaged in the past, or the history of behavior you've engaged in the past. Or you can persist in behavior as long as it is in the service of your chosen values. Now, based on relational frame theory, ACT illuminates the way that language entangles clients into futile attempts to wage war against their own inner lives. Through metaphor, paradox, and experiential exercises, clients learn how to make healthy contact with thoughts, feelings, memories, and physical sensations that have been feared and avoided. Clients gain skills to recontextualize and accept these private events and develop greater clarity about personal values and commit to needed behavior change. So, with regards to how ACT illuminates the ways language entangles clients in futile attempts, one of my favorite pieces of ACT is to look at the history of language and how language developed. And in many discussions about ACT that I've been a part of, you hear about the history of language and generally going back to caveman times, right? So if you think about caveman times, not a whole lot of language existed. And so it existed in the form of grunts and pointing and things of that nature. And so first language generally developed with pointing at something and grunting, and became associated with something, right? And then pointing at a woolly mammoth may have referred to food, so right? And then if a saber-toothed tiger was there, all of those sounds eventually developed into language that the community of cavemen were using, that eventually, fast forward thousands of years, is the language that we use today. Knowing that the basis of language really is just sounds that are created by our vocal cords that eventually become associated with certain things in the world in terms of either stimuli in the environment or emotions, abstract concepts, whatever it is, at its basis, language really is just sounds being created by our bodies that we get to choose how the association affects us. But rather than just talk through all the academic pieces of ACT, it may be easier to show you what ACT looks like through the clipboard exercise. All right. Well, thanks for joining me today, Miss Caitlin. You know, it's kind of hard to explain ACT, and so it might be easier if I showed you what it was like through metaphor. So would you be willing to do that with me?
Absolutely.
Excellent. So what I would first ask you to do is, can you take this notebook, hold on to it tightly so that I can't pull it away from you. And this will represent all of the negative thoughts and feelings and experiences that you have, and want to hold on to it as tightly as possible. And then now what I want you to do is I want you to hold it up as close to your face as possible. Don't worry, I won't be doing anything to you. But with it there in front of your face, would you be able to have a conversation with me?
Not well.
And what about your view of the world? Would you be able to look at and appreciate all the beauty in the world if you're wrapped up in your thoughts and feelings?
Definitely not.
And what about, as you're holding so tightly onto those thoughts and feelings, would you be able to hug a baby or hug a loved one?
No.
Absolutely not. All right, so for the next part of this exercise, Miss Caitlin, if you wouldn't mind, you can bring the notebook over here towards me. And what we're going to do is I want you to put your hands flat upon this side of it, all right? And I want you to push with all of your might. And this is going to represent all of the things that you have done over the course of your life to get these painful thoughts and feelings to go away. And if you were to keep this up all day, would it eventually tire you out?
Yes.
Well, nobody can say that you're not working hard at getting rid of all these thoughts and feelings, right?
Yes.
All right. All right. So let's then take the third option. So I want you to take the notebook and I want you to just gently place it in your lap. Now you can take your hands off. And now, if you were to have a conversation, oh, sorry about that. Would we feel more connected and engaged?
Yes.
Would you be able to read my facial expressions
Yes.
and have a back and forth?
Yes.
And are you able to have a much bigger view of the world that you live in?
Yes.
Absolutely. And what about your hands now? Do you have the ability to hug a loved one or hold a baby?
Yes.
Excellent. But those thoughts and feelings are still there.
That they are.
And so the point of ACT is not to get rid of these things, but instead change our association and to allow them to just be there and not allow us to attenuate to them. Thank you. All right, so first things first, I'd like to thank my coworker and teammate, Ms. Caitlin Dalton, who will be sitting for her BCBA here soon. We're very excited for that, but she was kind enough to participate in the video. I do apologize if it was a little hard to hear, in that we did that video on Monday, and I gotta say, Caitlin and I felt that our Oscar-worthy performances were good enough that we did it in one take, and that's all we needed. So we were done and over with. So thank you again, Caitlin. It was a lot of fun. Generally, when I have been doing this presentation, I do the clipboard exercise live with somebody. And as we were doing a webinar, I thought, how the heck am I going to pull this off? So we decided to do a video. So thanks again. She did a great job. Great sport about it. All right. Too fast. All right. There we go. All right. So how does all of this translate? ACT-based protocols have been developed and are available on the Association for Contextual Behavioral Science website for a number of audiences and treatment strategies. While these protocols are helpful and cover a wide range of topics, each one is designed to assist a clinician through a somewhat linear therapy-based approach to a very specific issue. So as I was doing the initial research, I thought, well, we could do a protocol for ICPN on how we could do this or that. But as I was looking through these protocols, they were very prescriptive in terms of what they were doing. And obviously in crisis prevention services, the situations that we walk into are all different, are all unique. And all of the individuals that we serve are unique in the context in which we have to serve them. And so a protocol isn't necessarily what we needed. Therefore, an ACT-informed approach to providing crisis prevention services should guide a clinician towards a more values-driven model. So an ACT-informed approach to crisis prevention services means contacting the present moment fully as a clinician and based on what the situation affords, changing or persisting in behavior in the service of chosen values to enhance the quality of life for everyone that we serve. Remember that whole psychological flexibility definition. Think of it as professional flexibility, clinical flexibility. How can we as staff, as clinicians working with individuals in crisis situations, be more present as a clinician? And based on whatever the situation may afford in that moment, do we change or persist in behavior as long as it is in the direction of the values that we have chosen? Or, more simply put, open up, be present, and do what matters. And that includes everyone that we work with. I think it goes without saying that with clients, we utilize an ACT-informed approach. But we can also do the same with staff. We have to think about staff members' values. What is their organizational values? What may be the difficulty they are having with acceptance? Is it that they're not willing to Open up and make space for some of those uncomfortable thoughts and feelings? Is it an issue where they aren't recognizing themselves as a context, as the catalyst for behavior change, from the place where behavior change can come from, instead of the unsuspecting victim of the world? Parents and families as well. Same thing in terms of utilizing that ACT-informed approach. How can we help them to understand aspects of acceptance, to understand what their values may be, as well as what their loved ones' values may be and how they may differ? All of those things come into play. Provider agencies, ISCs. For us in crisis prevention, we sometimes work with hospitals, emergency responders. There are virtually any number of people we can come in contact with, and we can take this approach anywhere that our job takes us. And since ACT is developed as a behavioral intervention to help people learn strategies to live life more in the present, more focused on values and all of those wonderful things, then why would we as crisis prevention clinicians not employ a similar model to enhance our own services? I always love this picture off to the right because I think it's a great representation of mindfulness, right? I don't want to be the guy in the picture with everything going on. I want to be the dog in the picture where I am focused on the here and now so I can be as effective as possible. So one model that we can use is obviously the Hexaflex. And I found this very fancy version of the Hexaflex on the internet and figured I would share it all with you. And for those of you who are aware of the Hexaflex, obviously, this is, sorry about that. This is the model that shows the 6 core processes involved in ACT. And if we start at the top with acceptance, it is being okay with difficult thoughts. Cognitive diffusion, being willing to experience difficult thoughts. Cognitive diffusion is observing your thoughts without being ruled by them. Being present, focusing on the here and now. Self as context, noticing our thoughts. Values, discovering what is really important to you. And commitment is taking action to pursue the important things in your life. And while I think all of these are great definitions, sometimes I think they can be somewhat vague. And so another form of ACT, or a different curriculum, is AIM, Accept, Identify, Move, which ultimately is able to provide the same 6 core processes in a different light. So values are ultimately the stuff that's important to you, the things that bring meaning to your life. Acceptance is being okay with both the good and bad stuff in life. Diffusion, learning to separate or detach from thoughts, images, and memories. Committed action is taking an effective action in the direction of your values. Present moment is being here now and being psychologically present. And the self as context is probably the most difficult thing to describe as well as to understand, especially for us behavior analysts. The definition I'll give here is the observer self, the same you that is you throughout your life, able to be aware of whatever we are thinking, feeling, sensing, or doing at any moment. And I always try to put in here that you are the context from which your behavior happens, not the unsuspecting victim of the world. Another way to think about the 6 core processes and to conceptualize how some of them work together to help us open up, be present, and do what matters is to look at the Triflex, which again has all of the components of the 6 core processes, but helps clinicians to understand what pieces and how they work together to do what. So acceptance in conjunction and working with diffusion, as you are accepting the good and bad things in life and diffusing the difficult things, you are opening up to the world. As you are contacting the present moment and recognizing that you are the context from which behavior happens, you are being present. And as you take committed action towards your values, you're doing what matters. Open up, be present, do what matters. Brings us to the first piece, which is values, the stuff that's important to you. And values are activities that give our lives meaning. Values are not goals, however, in that we never accomplish a value. Instead, values are like a compass. They help us make choices based on the directions in which we want our lives to go. Oftentimes, when I start working with somebody and we start talking about values, and we talk about it as this amorphous, like this big thing that doesn't necessarily have a goal accomplished to it, it can be confusing. And so oftentimes you start with the value of family, right? Family is a great example of a value because family means something different. Anybody can value family, but what family is to you can mean different things to different people. For some individuals, that means their immediate family. For some individuals, that means their extended family as well, or their friends, or the family that they have come to know over the course of their life. Whatever family is, family can be a value, but family cannot necessarily be a goal. We have goals towards our values. So if, for example, you want to interact more with your sibling, and I will make a phone call to my sister twice this week. Well, that's a goal for this week, right? If it's simply, I want to spend more time with my kids, at least an hour a day, every day this week. That's a goal that you can make towards the value of family. So what are your professional, ethical, and personal values? I know that as I was doing this presentation and coming up with some of the information, this piece really stuck out to me. Obviously, many of us have had the opportunity to do exercises where we are thinking about and really focusing on what is personally value to ourselves. But how many times have you had the opportunity to think about your professional values as well? But I wanted to open up the chat a little bit to everyone and get your take on things. What are some of your personal values? What are some of your professional values, ethical values? Feel free to put them in the chat.
Looks like we have empathy, honesty, kindness, compassion. See a lot of repeats. Respect.
Yeah.
Treating others as you would like to be treated. Respect, advocacy, accountability, loyalty, trust, hard work, growth, intentionality, trustworthy, dependable, being a good human, transparency, reliability, person-centered, authenticity, fostering growth, fostering independence, carrying a growth mindset, openness to others' views, commitment, fostering inclusion.
Excellent. So you see a lot of themes in there: empathy, compassion,
Absolutely.
respect, understanding. Excellent. You tell people are in mental health field and that people are really here to do, the good work that we're here for. And that's good. Continue to think about those things. Think about what your values are. And one of the things that you can do to kind of check in with yourself on how much is something a value of you, how much have you done towards that value in the last 2 weeks? And just check in with yourself. Okay, well, I say that family is a value of mine. What have I done in the past 2 weeks that would show that family is a value of mine? Well, I took my daughter driving over the weekend. She's 15. That causes me a lot of anxiety, but I did it, so it showed a value, right? Spent time throwing a baseball with my son on Sunday. Shows that family is a value of mine. Absolutely. Think about also those professional values, or think about your professional values as well. What is important to you, and how can you show people those things? I put some here on the slide, the ones that some are very much important to me, and I hope that they are as well for you. Advocacy for me is huge. I don't, somebody brought it up last week in another meeting. I don't like bullies, right? I don't either. I like advocating for people who need an extra voice or who may not be able to advocate for themselves. I'm a big advocate for trauma-informed care and getting more information out there about trauma-informed care because I think it's important. I think therapy is important. I think people need people to talk to. Social justice is important. Reporting for abuse and neglect and exploitation. Again, I don't care for bullies, so that one's a huge one for me. Communication is a value of mine. However, I will tell you up front, I'm not always great at communication, but it is a value of mine. I value communication very much. I just need better goals at communicating better. So, and the last one here is education and training. For me, I constantly am wanting to learn more and more, and that is why part of this presentation was so helpful and exciting. Was it offered me an opportunity to learn so much more and reconceptualize how I think about ACT and present it to other people as well. When thinking about values, you also have to take into consideration, what are the values of your organization? With ICPN, we have the opportunity to visit many different organizations and families, and we find out that lots of different people have lots of different values. And so we have to be mindful of those things and be cognizant of that walking into those situations so that we are not offending people or creating a situation where we are not establishing rapport in a professional manner. And while we as clinicians have values ourselves, so do the people that we interact with. Learning and understanding those values can provide us with guidance on how to best support the people that we serve. By being present and accepting that people we interact with may or may not have the same values, diffusing difficult thoughts and feelings, and taking committed actions, we as clinicians become more psychologically flexible to be able to respond to the present moment rather than personal and professional biases or struggles that may distract from a mindful clinical approach. And again, words mean something. That entire phrase right there was all utilizing ACT language to specify exactly what we're talking about here with values. There we go. Technical difficulties. We can also listen for values in others. From the first time that you interact with someone, be it a client, a staff, anyone, you can begin to listen for the values of that person and the values that may be important to that person. Family, independence, being hardworking, being lazy, being social, being a homebody. All of these things can be values, even if the value is not considered socially acceptable or typical. I can remember going back to the original ACT book and reading a chapter, and I got to a certain point where Stephen Hayes made the case for the idea that an alcoholic can live a value-driven life, even if the clinician does not necessarily agree with the decisions a person is making. And I had to go back and reread that section multiple times because obviously in the mental health field, we are taught that substance abuse is one of those things that are frowned upon and we need to help a person overcome. And Stephen made a great case for it. Again, if you think about that Hexaflex and the 6 core processes, the idea that the person, if you think about, let's say, the person's values, if the person's values are centered around drinking and things of that nature, if the person's family life is centered around that, if the person's committed actions are centered around that, if the person's diffusion has to do more with things that make them uncomfortable about being sober, things of that nature. Again, go back and read it. It makes the case, and it really made the case for every now and again, there are values out there that may not be socially acceptable, but a person is living their own value-driven life. Sorry, I got distracted there for just a moment. This also became relevant to me a few years back when I was working with a young man who, and this was not through ICPN, but a young man who was confined to a wheelchair, and he had ultimately been in a situation where he was staying up all night playing video games and sleeping throughout the day. The agency that was working with him obviously wanted him to attend a day program and do all of these things that he had absolutely no interest in. In getting to know this person more, the person had a lot of social anxiety as well around what people would think about his disability and things of that nature. And so what I came to find out is the things that he was doing in terms of playing video games at night online was something he valued because he got to interact with people. Nobody's got to look at him or judge him for what he looked like. Everybody was his friend. And here was a set of people that he had contact with every day who weren't going to judge him and not going to ask him to do anything that made him uncomfortable. And I couldn't argue with that being a very value-driven life for that individual. And so I met him where he was, and we did a compromise in terms of where he was willing to change certain aspects of his life so that he could be more independent. And ultimately, we were able to come to a good compromise. So we also have to think about what is important to that person, what is important to the organizations that you work with, and what is important to the staff or to their management. And how can you as a clinician encourage the person to do something based on their values, be it the client or the staff or the parent? Could we use behavioral momentum? Get the person saying yes, little bits at a time, all the way up to that larger behavior we're getting them to ultimately complete. Or do we use motivational interviewing? Obviously, motivational interviewing is a very useful technique, utilizing somebody's values, and then ultimately the person, through some strategies we work with, can motivate themselves to carry out the behavior change strategy. Very strange. All right, brings us to acceptance. And acceptance is being okay with both the good and bad stuff in life. Acceptance is making room for unpleasant feelings, sensations, urges, and other private experiences. So here's that first behavioral terminology in there. Private experiences or private events is a behavioral terminology referring to thoughts, right? So if something happens, or thoughts and feelings, experiences within the skin, if it happens within your body, it is a private experience because only you can experience that thing. So if you see it throughout this discussion, that's what I'm referring to. Acceptance is making room for those unpleasant feelings, sensations, urges, those private experiences, and allowing them to come and go without struggling with them, running from them, or giving them undue attention. And that can be a big thing in terms of people trying to understand, well, it's not just being okay with the good and bad stuff, but we have to make room for unpleasant feelings. And that can be very difficult. Many people spend a lot of their time avoiding uncomfortable feelings, uncomfortable situations, and people will go to great extents to avoid those things. And so just the idea of acceptance can be very difficult. At the same time, acceptance or lack of acceptance can, to some extent, be socially reinforced, as crazy as that sounds. If you look at the picture here on the right side of the screen, I always love this example of acceptance because I think it is a great one, right? You probably all know that one person in your life who, when it is raining outside, you know, you hear, oh, I don't like the rain. I wish it wasn't raining. My day would be better if it wasn't raining. My day is ruined. Every day is like this. It's always like this. Why does it always rain when all I want is for it to be sunny? You all know that person. And that person is absolutely having a tough time accepting the weather that day, right? Acceptance is recognizing that all of those words, all of those thoughts, all of those uncomfortable feelings that the person just expressed aren't necessary. It is stepping outside, seeing the rain and saying, yep, it's raining. Better go get the umbrella. And let's be honest, the situations that crisis prevention staff encounter are inherently challenging. And it's not just crisis prevention staff. The situations that most all of us in this field encounter are inherently challenging. So what do we do with these unpleasant thoughts, feelings, sensations, urges, and experiences related to situations that we experience? And how do we allow them to come and go without struggling with them or giving them undue attention? Again, I'm going to open it up for a little bit of chat because I want to know what do you do with those unpleasant thoughts and feelings, the things that happen? How do you allow them to come and go without struggling? Journal, all right. Laugh, journal, walks, good, walk. Gardening, a couple of gardenings, I like that. Wow, lots. You guys are doing great. I love it.
I'm sorry,
Talking.
Scott. I keep getting kicked off.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. It's just coming in so quickly. I'm like, oh my gosh, as I'm trying to read them, I'm like, I'm not able to stay and read at the same time. I'm trying. So, but thank you all so much for putting things in the chat. This is great. Vented, don't mention it again. That's okay. There we go. Rage bake. I like that. That's a new term. I'm going to use that. Hiking with the dog. There we go. Great. Thank you all. Yeah, keep putting them in because it's important for all of us to think about what do we do with that. If we bottle it up, it's going to not go well for us, right? So we have to think about what do we do with those unpleasant thoughts and feelings and sensations and experiences because they are bound to come up. And it happens, and we have to recognize what is the most effective way that we can get through this moment and diffuse. For me, I am a person who loves listening to music as I am driving around, usually very loudly. However, if I have had a rough day and I really need to diffuse from some things and really process and accept what happened today, no music on in the vehicle. I will be driving and simply sitting there thinking about things and trying to diffuse whatever thought it is that I am experiencing. And it happens sometimes just because of the nature of what we do. Sometimes we don't have control over the situations that the individuals we serve are in. We don't have control over the mechanisms by which a person is able to get funding or to receive services. We don't have control over the staffing crisis that is currently going on. And so as a result of all of these multiple factors, we as clinicians have to figure out ways to deal with and manage these thoughts and feelings and allow them to come and go without struggling so that we can be more present and more effective at our duties. Yeah. And so in terms of some things we can do to increase acceptance or at least practice some of these things, obviously in other talks I've heard, people offer up, well, you can engage in mindfulness exercises, you can engage in diffusion, or you could examine your own verbal behavior. All of those things sound well and good, but for me as a behavior analyst, sometimes I need things explained behaviorally to me. I've had people say to me, let's do some mindfulness exercises. Well, I'll be honest with you. I love mindfulness exercises. I don't do them all the time, and I don't love all of them. And sometimes I can remember, especially in my early days, I didn't understand why it was so important to just sit down, breathe, and focus for like a minute or 5 minutes until I really thought about it behavior. And so from a behavioral standpoint, mindfulness exercises are repeated trials of intentionally focusing on internal experiences and actively decreasing the duration of time attenuated to those private events. Again, words mean something, right? Break that down. Repeated trials. Every time you sit down and do a mindfulness exercise is a repeated trial. You are intentionally focusing on internal experiences, be it some piece of your body or a thought, and then actively decreasing the duration of time attenuated to those private events. Take the very famous leaves on a stream mindfulness example. Hopefully many of you have participated in leaves on a stream at some point. If you have not, go on YouTube. It is a very good exercise and can be done within a relatively short amount of time. As you are doing it, leaves on a stream causes you to intentionally focus on internal experiences, meaning you are imagining a stream and your thoughts then get placed onto leaves on the stream. You pick up the leaf, you notice the thought, and then you let it go, which is ultimately an active process of decreasing the duration of time that you are attenuating to that private event before you are allowing it to move on. The more times that your brain has the opportunity to go through that process, it's just like lifting weights at the gym. Every time you do it, your brain gets better at letting those thoughts go. That's when I got sold on mindfulness exercises, when I understood the behavior change mechanism behind it. So then we can move on to diffusion. Diffusion is obviously one of the 6 core processes, but behaviorally it is repeated trials of actively engaging in alternative topographies of verbal behavior to decrease the magnitude of responding to conditioned emotional and physiological responses. Words mean something. Repeated trials. Every time you do diffusion, it's a repeated trial of actively engaging in alternative topographies. Whenever I describe topographies, it is ultimately a topography is how a behavior happens. It is what it looks like, the operations a person must engage in order to carry out a behavior. So I always think of the best example of different topographies of a behavior is you can have different topographies of greeting people. You can say hi, you can say hello, you can say what's up, you can say bro, right? I'm not used to that one yet. My 12-year-old calls me bro and I'm still not used to it. But there are multiple topographies, multiple variations on how a person can greet another person. All of those are alternative topographies of the same behavior, of the same verbal behavior in particular. And verbal behavior doesn't have to necessarily just be speaking or writing. Verbal behavior is any form of behavior that can communicate a message. And diffusion is to decrease the magnitude of responding. So diffusion recognizes that over time, words come to have very strong emotional associations with them. And as a result, the way we talk about things and the way those words affect us because of the magnitude of which we experience that response to that stimulus. And so over time, a person can develop or can have conditioned very strong emotional responses. For example, if someone were to say to you very loudly, "I hate you," again, that's stuck with you. Again, that sound of someone saying, "I hate you," and the feeling of shame and hurt and embarrassment and everything else, those two things become fused together. And so the idea of diffusion is to decrease how difficult that thing hurts, how badly that "I hate you" hurts, decrease the magnitude of that conditioned emotional response. The last thing that we can do in terms of some examples of acceptance is examine our own verbal behavior. Most ACT work involves breaking down the language and avoidance strategies of the person we are working with, but how often do we really examine our own verbal behavior? And this can be a tough one, and really take a look in the mirror in terms of, are there things that I am saying or doing that are becoming a barrier to me being an effective clinician with this individual? For example, just a few weeks ago, I had a situation come up where I got an email and I found myself having a very emotional response to the email because I thought, oh my gosh, well, this is what happened and this is the context. And when I noticed that, what I would refer to as mindlessness, I immediately recognized it for what it was. Thanked my brain and said, "Thanks, brain, for doing your job." Diffused that thought and immediately went to the committed action of, what do I have to do to help on the behalf of the client that I'm serving? But in order to do that, it takes practice. And I had to recognize that there's plenty of verbal behavior that goes on in my head that is not necessarily helpful. And that is one of the most key phrases in ACT. Is that thought helpful? And if it is, then it is probably in the direction of your values. If the thought is not helpful, is it something that you want to pay attention to? Accepting acceptance. Crisis prevention staff also encounter a wide range of individuals, all of whom have different learning histories, training, education, and traumas of their own. And this isn't just clients, but also staff and administrators, ISCs, hospital staff. Absolutely everyone we come in contact with has a different learning history. They have a different social history in terms of who their family makeup is and what they learned from a very early age. Their training and education may be different from ours. And we cannot underestimate the impact of trauma, especially in crisis prevention services and many of the situations that we are walking into on a day-to-day basis. As a result, acceptance becomes a constant process of learning how to accept situations and people, as well as modeling and encouraging acceptance in others. The bad news is, one of the most difficult aspects of acceptance is simply to accept that some people may not be willing or know how to change, or to accept the situation as it is. And I put that one in italics because I think it's very important for people to consider. Two of the most difficult things that we as crisis prevention staff do have to work on, making room for, is accepting the idea that sometimes some individuals are just not willing to change. They don't see any problem with the world in which they live, the way they interact with other people, the way that they interact with their world. The person may just not be in that place. The person may not know how to change. And there are other times, and it's probably the most difficult, where it is simply the situation itself that cannot be changed. There are no mechanisms for change in terms of services or resources that the family or the provider agency is able to access in those moments. And in those moments, we have to be there to support and validate people. Which brings us to diffusion. Diffusion means learning to step back and separate or detach from our thoughts, images, and memories. The goal is to see our thoughts for what they are, nothing more than words and pictures that our minds use to make sense of the world. If you go back to that history of language example that we talked about a little bit ago, fusion is ultimately when language gets fused together with emotions, thoughts, feelings, memories, all of those things. And ultimately, diffusion is to just see our thoughts for just what they are. How many times have we said to ourselves, I'm not good enough to do this thing? And then eventually we do that thing anyways, right? Our thinking mind can tell us lots of things. And if we buy into our thinking mind, then we can limit ourselves and not fulfill our full potential. And so diffusion allows us an opportunity to step back and do that. And again, behaviorally, it is the repeated trials of actively engaging in those alternative topographies that decrease the magnitude of responding to those conditioned emotional and physiological responses. So, an example of how to step back, if everybody would like to take this opportunity, you guys can do this from the comfort of wherever you are enjoying this webinar. I want you to think of a negative self-judgment. I'll give you an example that I enjoy using, or at least will use today. I'm a loser. Now I want everybody to fuse with that thought for the next 10 seconds. I'm going to time you on my imaginary watch. I'm a loser. I'm a loser. I'm a loser. Now, once you have fused with that thought, I want you to replay that thought in your head once again and add in the line, I'm having the thought that I'm a loser. Having the thought that I'm a loser. Having the thought that I'm a loser. Now, one more time, I want you to add in the line, I notice I'm having the thought that I'm a loser. I notice I'm having the thought that I'm a loser. The first time I ever did this exercise, it took a second, but I felt like I could almost see in my head stepping back from that thought. I could think about the millions of times that my mind has said something to me like, you're not good enough, I'm a loser, this or that. And just by stepping back and saying, I'm having this thought, I recognize that this thought is separate from me as a person. And then to take one more step back and say, I notice that I'm having this thought, means that my observer self now can recognize that the thinking self is doing separate from observer self. That one made it make sense for me. Diffusion is also about doing something to kind of break up that fusion. One of the ways that I've often seen or heard suggested is turn it into a song, right? And so for your listening pleasure, soy un pendedor, I'm a loser, baby, so why don't you, you know what? I'm not going to finish the rest of that because this is a mental health presentation and it probably would not be kosher, but you get what I'm getting at. And just so you know, the first song that I generally have people do is Happy Birthday. And the reason is everybody knows Happy Birthday. And if you use that as the example and it sounds ridiculous, the person is more likely to choose a song that is more meaningful to them that will help them diffuse quicker. For example, if I use I'm a loser, I'm a loser today. I'm a loser today. You can imagine the person smiling and thinking how ridiculous I look doing this, but recognizing that every time I say it, those words are hurting just a little bit less. For those of you who have never actually had a chance to do the lemons exercise, I will attempt to do it over webinar. I've never quite done this medium before in terms of doing the lemons exercise, but we'll see if we can make this magic happen. In terms of the lemons exercise, what I would like for all of you to do is imagine this lemon that I am holding in my hand. This wonderful lemon is a nice big juicy lemon that I picked from the store on my way here to the presentation today. You can notice it's still wet from the water glistening down the side of the lemon. And that's the skin on the lemon smells just a little bit of that lemon zest, you know. So I'm going to take my lemon, put it on the table, and I'm going to cut my lemon in half. God, I love that smell of lemon. It's like lemon scent as you're cleaning stuff. And oh, I'm getting a little lemon stuff right here on my hand. Man, it's really sour. As I'm describing this imaginary lemon and talking about the thoughts of what it looks like, what it smells like, what it may taste like, did it cause salivation in anybody that is on the other end? Hopefully it did. If you started salivating thinking about lemonade or lemons in general, that's the point of it. It is the idea that even just through words, through describing a stimulus, the brain can produce a reaction and a response to something that isn't even present in the environment. And then to show the real strength and the power of diffusion, you take the power away. And so you say to the same person, okay, now I've caused you to salivate with this lemon, and now I'm going to take the lemon's power away. Are you ready for this magic trick? Lemon, 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 lemon. And in essence, you sit there and have the person repeat the word lemon over and over for about a 2-minute span of time, or however long it takes, to where the person's no longer having that physiological response. Then you ask the person, well, why did that happen? And ultimately, they may not know why, because for most of their lives, words have had meaning and associations and brought about things, but they didn't necessarily know how to take away that reinforcing power. The lemons exercise works because of a behavioral principle called habituation, which is ultimately repeated presentation of a stimulus decreases our responsiveness to that stimulus. Again, habituation is a great behavioral catalyst in diffusion. Repeated presentation decreases responsiveness. Think about your favorite song. Why is it your favorite song? Because the first time you heard it, it was novel, it was cool, it was great. You wanted to listen to it 15 times a day. After about 6 months, you didn't listen to it anymore, because after the repeated presentation of that song, it had a decrease in your responsiveness to that stimulus in the environment. So it appears that diffusion is an active process of not only trying to think differently, but doing something that changes your history of reinforcement with that particular private event. And in terms of diffusion day to day, research a few diffusion techniques for yourself and find which ones work for you. Not all diffusion techniques work for everybody. The happy birthday one, I don't know many people that one works on, but I've worked with a number of people who, when you talk about diffusion with regards to, can you put that difficult thought on a computer screen and have a bouncing ball over the words? That is a alternative technique that has been useful for some individuals, especially if they really enjoy iPads and computers. For you as a clinician, I would ask you to try it out first on a situation that only causes minor discomfort. All right. If you're going to try diffusion, diffuse something easy, like, oh my gosh, I was 5 minutes late for work this morning. Let me diffuse the heck out of that. Right. That's an easy one. If it's some major calamity that's happened in the last 2 weeks and you're like, that's the first thing that I'm going to diffuse, probably not going to go well. Make sure that the first thing you try it on is only a minor discomfort. And make a goal to use diffusion throughout the week. Again, it's just like working out. If you're not doing it regularly, then you may get out of practice. The more that you use it, the more that it will become effective, as well as you'll be able to pick up on it in others. Be proactive and mindful before and after stressful meetings, sessions, or interactions as well. As a clinician, we kind of know our schedule day to day, and we can look at our work week and think, oh my gosh, I should probably add in at least 5 minutes of diffusion before or after this meeting so that I can move on to the next activity and still be present for that activity. As interesting as it is, I've actually had the opportunity to give this presentation a couple of times already. And the first time that I was giving it to one of our PSR programs that we work with, I actually had to diffuse before going to do the presentation. And it had nothing to do with my anxiety or anything else, but it had been such a difficult day that I had to diffuse everything that had gone on just so that I could be present to provide the presentation that day and be very mindful in that moment. So diffusion doesn't have to be just difficult things. Sometimes it can be a proactive, useful thing to help you bring yourself back to the present moment. You can also encourage or offer diffusion with coworkers when they seem fused with something. Listen for it in your coworkers in terms of, well, I can't do that thing. I've never been successful in the past, or something along those lines. All of those are examples of fusion. The person may be fused with this idea that they have never been successful carrying out or implementing this specific strategy or something along those lines. And is that thought helpful? Most likely not. It is more likely an avoidance strategy the person uses to not engage in that behavior or that particular thing. And diffusion, like everything else, takes practice. The more we practice, the more prepared we are as clinicians to assist others in identifying fusion and ways to diffuse. In our field work, diffusion can also can often supplement many of the other supports that we already are providing to clients. Many of the individuals that we work with we provide validation trainings, things of that nature, and with validation can segue directly into diffusion. I can understand why you feel that way. How can we make that thought hurt less? Or what can we do to diffuse that thought? Functional analytic psychotherapy. Diffusion can be a CRB2. Even with skill system, diffusion could be a form of on-track thinking or on-track action. Diffusion, as well as many of the 6 core processes, blend very well with many of the other modalities that we are already working with. In addition, we can offer support staff diffusion strategies to encourage less emotionally charged responding as well. Sounds like it was a tough weekend with Bobby. Would you be willing to try something with me that might make this a little less frustrating? It might only take a minute. As crisis prevention staff working with many individuals across many agencies and in a number of situations, it's not uncommon that we sometimes have to talk with staff and help them diffuse, even in a much more casual manner. Which brings us to present moment. Consciously connecting with and engaging in whatever is happening in this moment. I love the picture on the right, because if you have ever had the pleasure of spending time with a kid for an extended period of time and had that moment where you just got to be a kid with them and put on the red cape and act like a goofball, that's present moment. That's wonderful. That's priceless. That's the best. That's being in this moment. Bills don't matter. Work doesn't matter. Drama doesn't matter. just this. That's present moment. Because the only moment in life that you will ever be 100% in control of is right now, and it's constantly happening. Think about how you are when you are in the flow versus when you're wrapped up in your thoughts. How is it when you are in your flow at home versus when you are wrapped up in your thoughts at home? Are there things you do at your home where you are able to do things and you get lost for hours? Sometimes it may be cleaning. It might be your favorite hobby, maybe whatever. Versus times where you're wrapped up in your thoughts and it feels like time is taking absolutely forever, right? Now I want you to think about a time where you were in the flow at work versus a time where you were wrapped up in your thoughts. Same thing happens with us at work in terms of present moment. I am a person who really enjoys training things such as this. And when I'm doing things like this, I very much feel in the flow. And if I did this for 8 hours a day, it would probably feel like about a 2-hour workday by the end of the day. Versus a time where I'm all wrapped up in my thoughts and that 8-hour workday can feel like 24 hours. Present moment changes how we interact in that moment and how effectively we can respond in that moment. More present we are affects not only our ability to perform our jobs, but also many people report an increase in the intrinsic rewards that they receive from being more present. Plus, the more present we are, the more that we are able to respond to situations objectively and effectively. Okay, real quick, before we move on, I saw that there were a couple of people that had raised hands. Didn't know if Danielle, are you there?
Yes, I am here.
Okay, how do we do the raised hands thing?
So anyone that has their hand raised can insert their question or comment into the question and answer or chat. I can see maybe if it's possible to unmute them. It just takes me a little bit to find who has raised hands. So it might just be best.
Okay, we can do it at the end. Yeah, if you want. I just wanted to see if it was something that we had to take care of now or at the end.
Yep, if anyone has a certain question or comment that they want to provide, they can do so in that chat box so that everyone can see it. I'm not seeing anything come through yet, so we can keep that in mind for the end.
Yeah, that works. That works. Yes, please keep your questions in mind, and I will do my best to answer everything at the end. So, all right, moving on. Hopefully, technical difficulties. There we go. Being here now, being psychologically present. Nobody can be mindful or psychologically present all of the time. If look for those times throughout our week where we can plan on incorporating some grounding mindfulness exercises that work for you to bring you back to the present moment before meetings or sessions. Another big one is to turn off your phone, at least to turn it on silent and put it away. How many of you were able to do that during even today? I even had that moment where I have 2 phones and I had to put them off to the side just to make sure that I'm fully mindful of this presentation so I don't get distracted. Same thing should be done in our day-to-day work. Make a conscious effort to also notice mindlessness, engage in diffusion, and get back to being present, if at all possible. As crazy as this example may be, a few weeks ago, I was going to Kansas City to visit some friends over the St. Patrick's Day weekend. And as I was driving around thinking about the trip, a thought popped into my head of, oh my gosh, they're going to want me to have barbecue with them. And for some reason, over the last 20 years, I've always told myself, I'm not a big fan of Kansas City barbecue. I'm kind of a barbecue fan, but I've always said to myself, I'm not real crazy about Kansas City barbecue. And when I really thought about it, I didn't really have a reason for it. It might have been one time I tried it, but that was a moment of mindlessness. So instead, I engaged in a little bit of diffusion to then recognize one of the things that I value is spending time with my friends. And one committed action that I can make is going to visit them this weekend and opening up and trying some Kansas City barbecue. And even if it wasn't still my favorite, I diffused that thought, I took the committed action, and it was in the direction of my values. And as a result, I had a good outcome. We also have to try, model, and encourage present moment awareness across people and situations. For example, when individuals are frequently discussing events that have occurred in the past, or what if scenarios of things that could occur in the future, sometimes we just have to gently guide people back to the present moment to focus on the here and now, to minimize some of the off-track situations that can occur as a result of not being present. Which brings us to committed action. Taking an effective action guided by our values. The most difficult thing about committed action is that committed action means doing what it takes to live by our values, even if that brings up pain or discomfort. And this can be, for many individuals, the most difficult part of committed action. Committed action is scary because ultimately it is saying, I'm going to do the thing that I've always been saying I'm scared to do. I have to do this thing even though it's uncomfortable. I have to do this thing even though it may change my relationship with somebody else, because you know what? It's right. It's my value. As ICPN staff, it is not completely impossible that we walk into a situation and may have to ultimately end up reporting. We know that that will ultimately change the relationship that we have with that person or with that entity in some way, shape, or form. But because advocacy and reporting of abuse and neglect and all of those things, professionalism, ethics, all of those are major values of ours, we have to do those things. We have to take those committed actions. And so as clinicians, we also have to think about how many times are things not happening because we are the ones not taking committed actions. It's easy for us to say, well, these things aren't happening because other people aren't doing them. But how many times is it because we are not taking the committed action as a clinician? So what can you do right now, today, this week, that would show your values to you, your clients, their teams, or to their families? What can you do to improve your skills? Which brings us now to self as context versus the self as content. And again, this is the piece that I think for many people can be very difficult to kind of conceptualize. And so I will do my best. Self as context is the observer self, pure awareness, the part of the mind that is aware of whatever we're thinking, feeling, sensing, or doing in any moment. When we did that diffusion technique exercise and stepped away from our thoughts, that's what we're talking about. When you step away from your thoughts, that part of you that notices the thinking, that's your observer self, the you that never changes. Over the course of your life, lots of things are going to change. People experience bodily changes, change in thinking, change of feelings, a change of roles. It even includes all your superficial aesthetic changes. I know in high school I had blonde hair, right, and baggy pants. No matter what changes happen, self as context refers to the part of you that remains unchanged throughout your life. While this concept seems very mentalistic, the behavior change strategy is, again, related to changing the history of reinforcement associated with a person's verbal behavior. Danielle, could you give me one moment?
Absolutely.
Okay, I am thinking I'm going to sneeze.
Oh, Candace says to press on the upper lip. Does that really help, Candace? Shannon says to look into the light. Let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break. We'll come back at about 2:25. Everyone can get up, move around a little, and get a drink, go to the bathroom, and we'll be back at 2:25.
All right, sorry about that, everybody. I knew that was not going to be pleasant for me, so.
No problem. We told everyone to move around a little, go get a drink, and we'll start again at 2:25 just to give everyone a little bit of time.
Perfect, perfect.
I will have to say that everyone's still debating about barbecue sauce in the chat box. It's a hot debate.
It's a hot debate. No, I better check this out then.
We're still going.
Yeah, yeah, I like it. See, I knew barbecue was going to be one of those controversial things.
Yep.
People have an opinion on.
Yep. Everyone has opinion and they stick with it. It's hard to change that.
It is. It is.
As we are waiting here to get started again, people have been asking about the PowerPoint presentation. I will send a copy of that out with everyone's certificate. So everyone will get a copy of that in their email with their certificate.
Okay. That is perfect because, yeah, the one that I was trying to send you, I realized with the video in it, it's too large.
Too
So the one
large.
that doesn't have the video and then it's perfect.
Okay, perfect.
Pat's Barbecue in Murfreesboro or 17th Street. Yeah, the 17th Street for sure. Hands down.
And yes, Tyra, the certificate will be for an hour and 45 minutes. So it'll be 1.75. For BCBAs and BCABAs, it'll be 2 hours. It'll be that 2 CEUs. Everyone's gonna go get barbecue for dinner tonight, Scott.
Yeah, right.
All right, as we're starting back up here, I did miss earlier in the Q&A, Sarah had asked an interesting question that I think would lead to a good discussion in that who judges the value of or who judges the worth of a value? Because we were talking about values earlier, whether that was professional values, personal values. So who judges the worth of a value? I thought that was an interesting question.
I think that only the person themselves can judge the value. I mean, That's, I think, what Stephen was talking about. I think it's a good question, because who does judge that value? Because yes, if somebody is an alcoholic and says all of the things that I value are alcohol related and everything else, yeah, who am I to judge that? Absolutely. I think that's great. And Stephen's first book was very much like that.
All right, Scott, if you want to go ahead and continue on, we got about 20 minutes left.
All right. Thank you all so much. I do apologize for that. So, all right, moving on back to it. And then I went back too far. All right. The self as context versus self as content. All right, back to it. The you that never changes. Over the course of your life, lots of things change. We talked a little bit about how this seems very mentalistic, but the behavior change strategy is, again, related to changing the history of reinforcement associated with a person's verbal behavior. And so self as context versus self as content, what it comes down to is this. Oftentimes when people talk about themselves and refer to themselves, we are referring to ourselves as content. Well, I wasn't able to do this thing because, I didn't get enough assistance from my coworkers. I didn't get enough help at school. I didn't get enough assistance from my parents. Well, while all of those things may or may not be true, it allows a person to perceive themselves as the unsuspecting victim of the world, rather than seeing themselves as the catalyst for behavior change, the context from which behavior change can happen. And so self as context is recognition that no matter what has happened in your past, no matter what self-evaluation you have about yourself, I'm not good enough, I'm not strong enough, I'm not smart enough, no matter what your thinking mind says to you, self as context would say, it doesn't matter. Here, now, in this present moment, you have the opportunity to either change or persist in behavior in the direction of your values. And that's the power of self as context, really understanding once you recognize you are the place from which behavior happens instead of the victim of the world, that's when you start changing how you can go about engaging in those committed actions. Because you are the context from which your behavior happens. You don't have to be ruled by your own self-evaluations or the evaluations that others make about you. ACT therapy also makes use of metaphors, paradox, and experiential exercises during the course of treatment. In an active-formed approach to crisis prevention services, these tools can be used in a variety of situations, but should also be used with caution so that we don't appear condescending. Obviously, we don't want to be walking into meetings suggesting everybody does mindfulness with us and diffusion techniques, because we're going to seem a little full of ourselves. But in terms of metaphors, ACT is full of them, and they are used for various purposes. Some are quite simple. Quick metaphors, such as dropping the rope, can be used to briefly describe the futility of struggling with thoughts and feelings. Metaphors such as digging a hole should be reserved for more therapeutic purposes. If you've never gone through digging a hole as a metaphor, it takes probably 10 minutes to even describe the entire metaphor to someone. Not going to be useful in context of the meeting that you are sitting in. Inherent paradox is produced by the functional contradiction between the literal and the functional properties of a verbal event in ACT therapy. Oftentimes, we are trying to create that inherent paradox within the person's own language about themselves. So they may say, well, I'm not good enough to do this thing. Well, if you weren't good enough to do it in that context, what makes you good enough to do it in this context? And is it really true that you aren't? Because if you are good enough in this context, then you are in this as well. Inherent paradox is created by that functional contradiction and is often used to, similar to motivational interviewing, to motivate the person into behavior change on their own accord. In our everyday work, paradox is much more easily expressed by pointing out situations, behaviors, or actions that may be contradictory to someone's rule-governed behavior. For example, in this, a similar situation came up not long ago. I walked into a family's home and the father says to me, my son just bought his, fifth iPad, or fourth one. Who needs 4 iPads? And in that moment, I had to, think about, okay, what is it that about paradox that is going to help this situation make sense? And so my response was pretty simple. While I completely understand where you're coming from, can you think of other people who have multiples of the same item? What about people who collect baseball cards or someone who is a gun collector? I understand that it can be frustrating, but would you be willing to help your son and I figure this out together? The gun collector one was the one that I used. And with that father in particular, it kind of stopped him in his tracks because he recognized, yes, in fact, there are people that have multiples of a similar item. And rather than talking about the 4th iPad, it was going to be much more beneficial and productive if we just start focusing on how to assist his son in this moment. ACT is also full of experiential exercises designed to assist the client in contacting potentially troublesome thoughts, feelings, and sensations. As a result, many of these exercises should only be done in a therapeutic context. If you do want some experiential exercises to try out that may be easy, the AIM curriculum, Accept, Identify, Move, is an ACT-based curriculum that is used to teach mindfulness to children, or at least in a school curriculum through mindfulness experiential exercises. These exercises are fairly simple and do not necessarily involve the more in-depth therapeutic skills to then process and work through difficult thoughts and etc. So thank you all so much for attending this presentation today. And in a world where you could be anything, make sure that you are Baby Yoda. So we're going to open it up to chat and some questions for the rest of the time.
The only thing that I've seen thus far, Janice was asking about who's the Stephen that you're referring to?
Stephen Hayes. Dr. Stephen Hayes is the creator of ACT, one of them.
Everyone is very thankful. As people are, finishing up, whether or not they have questions or not, just as a reminder, give me about 14 days to get those continuing education certificates out to everyone. If you are a BCBA or a BCABA, please send me an email with your certification number, and I will send you a separate eval that you have to fill out in order to receive your certificate. Everyone else, when you exit the Zoom, there will be a survey that pops up that helps provide some feedback for not only Scott, but for us in general. Training recommendations are highly appreciated. Do you have any books that you could recommend? I saw that come through.
I definitely recommend Stephen Hayes's first book on ACT as I can't even remember the name, Acceptance and Commitment Therapy for Behavior Change. He's probably on the 2nd edition now. If you can find the 1st edition, that's my favorite. An easy to read one is Russ Harris's ACT Made Simple.
I am not seeing any questions, so, hang on. Someone asked about books again. will ask what other training topics you teach. So I will say that Scott is going to have another webinar coming up here, which he can tell you about right now. But you will see Scott again.
Yes. Yeah, next month, Danielle and everybody invited me back for normalizing mental health by lifting the stigma of mental illness. And if you thought this presentation took me down a few rabbit holes, you just wait until you see all the rabbit holes on the next one.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for having us, Scott. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to everyone for being here, being present. And we look forward to having you back, Scott.
Well, thank you so much, and everybody have a good day, and I'll see you next month.
Bye, everyone. Have a good day.